Most people believe that science and philosophy are two separate countries, divided by an ocean of cold, hard facts. We're taught that science is the eagle of human thought, soaring on evidence and discovery, while philosophy is just a chick, pecking at questions it lacks the wings to answer. But what if that border we've drawn so carefully is a complete fiction? What if the famous declaration of philosophy's death, proclaimed by thinkers like Stephen Hawking, is actually an illusion, a case of mistaken identity caused by a massive brain drain into the very fields like computer science and physics that claim to have replaced it? Welcome to an exploration of the most contentious intellectual boundary in human history. Today, we're going to dismantle the myth of the bright line between these two giants. We'll discover why there is truly no such thing as philosophy-free science, and why the centuries-long search for a single, perfect definition of truth has, in the words of philosopher Larry Loudon, fundamentally failed to deliver the goods. This is the hidden architecture of the modern mind. This is Philosophy versus Science on Bookshelf. To truly grasp the friction between these two domains, we first need to understand what this collective body of work actually represents. Think of it as an intellectual autopsy of what philosophers call the demarcation problem, that 2,000-year-old struggle to define, once and for all, where legitimate science ends and pseudoscience begins. This isn't just one book or one argument, it's a global, cross-century dialogue, drawing from the radical logic of Rudolf Carnap, the falsification criteria of Karl Popper, and the paradigm-shifting insights of Thomas Kuhn. The core thesis running through all of it is surprisingly simple and profoundly unsettling. Science did not defeat philosophy. Rather, science itself is actually a highly specialized branch of philosophy, originally known as natural philosophy, that has simply forgotten its origins. And in 2026, this matters more than ever. In an era of algorithmic intelligence, deep fakes, and information warfare, the ability to distinguish reliable knowledge from convincing illusion has become nothing less than a survival trait for both our individual minds and our collective democracy. This isn't an abstract academic debate, it's a psychological argument for intellectual integrity in a world where knowledge truly is power, for better or for catastrophe. Let's start with a provocative question that cuts to the heart of everything. Is science just a label we use to win arguments? For decades, the logical positivists of the Vienna Circle tried to declare all of metaphysics senseless simply because it couldn't be verified in a laboratory. They wanted a world where only what you could touch, measure, and reproduce was considered real. But then came the book's most unsettling insight. Karl Popper realized that empirical statements are actually no more verifiable than metaphysical ones. You can never prove a universal theory true, you can only fail to prove it false. So Popper flipped the entire script. He argued that for a statement or system to be ranked as scientific, it must be capable of conflicting with possible observations. It must be falsifiable. This matters because it reveals our deep human fear of uncertainty. If a theory cannot even in principle be proven wrong, it isn't science at all. It's a belief system dressed in a lab coat. Yet here's the disaster this creates. If we can't clearly define the border, how do we protect our schools, our courts, and our public policies from fanciful explanations that have little reliance on actual observations? We're left with an agonizing tension. The bright line of science might actually be a necessary myth for public understanding, even while philosophers know that line is, and always has been, a hopeless blur. So why does it feel so intuitively true that science has somehow surpassed philosophy? The answer, according to this work, is a profound case of historical amnesia. Before roughly 1800, there was no such thing as science. There was only natural philosophy. Isaac Newton didn't write a physics book, he wrote The Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. The uncomfortable truth here is that science only became independent by cutting its umbilical cord to its mother discipline, then immediately claiming it had never needed her. Aristotle once demanded apodictic certainty, absolute, demonstrable proof for anything to be called true knowledge. But modernity has quietly traded that impossible certainty for something far more mundane: puzzle solving. Thomas Kuhn's striking claim is that it's actually normal science, the workaday maintenance of whatever theoretical framework happens to be fashionable, that most distinguishes science from other enterprises, not the revolutionary breakthroughs we celebrate. This means that most of what scientists do is just keeping the current machine running, while the truly revolutionary shifts that reshape human understanding are, and always have been, deeply philosophical. We celebrate the specialized mechanic who tunes the engine of science, but we ignore the architect who designed the engine in the first place. This tension leads us to an even deeper question. Can we know anything at all without directly seeing it? This is the ancient rift between rationalism and empiricism, and the book interprets it through a strikingly modern psychological lens. Rationalists like Descartes argued that certain truths, the laws of logic, the concept of God, the nature of mathematics, are innate, placed in our minds at creation. Empiricists like Locke fired back with the image of the mind as a blank slate, waiting for experience to write upon it. But Leibniz offered a more nuanced metaphor that cuts through the debate. He said the mind isn't a blank slate, but a block of marble whose internal veins and patterns determine what shapes a sculptor can carve. The hardware of our minds determine what software we can run. This matters because it defines our very identity. If our knowledge is purely empirical, we're just passive mirrors reflecting the world. But if it's at least partly rational, we're active participants whose innate structures actually help determine what we perceive as reality itself. And lurking beneath all of this is the unsolved problem of induction. No matter how many times we've watched the sun rise, pure experience alone can never logically prove it must rise tomorrow. Science fundamentally relies on a kind of necessity that only philosophy can even attempt to justify. Finally, we have to confront the most dangerous delusion of all, the belief that science is neutral. The book quotes Francis Bacon's famous dictum, "Knowledge is power," but adds a chilling caveat. Whether that power becomes a blessing or a catastrophe for humanity depends entirely on the value system of the person wielding it. Science can describe how things are with breathtaking precision, but it is completely blind to how things should be. That's the realm of ethics, the normative guide that science cannot provide for itself. Without a moral foundation, science loses its direction and becomes a tool that can be turned to any purpose, noble or horrific. In 2026, we see this playing out in the struggle over utilitarianism, the idea of pursuing the greatest benefit for the greatest number. Should we pursue a breakthrough if it causes catastrophe for a minority? Science can calculate the data, model the outcomes, and predict the consequences, but it cannot make the choice. The book quietly demands that we recognize a terrifying truth. A scientist who is excellent at their technical job is not necessarily a good person, and unless they are grounded in some form of moral awareness, their expertise makes them more dangerous, not less. Most people walk away from this debate thinking they have to choose a side. They believe they must either be a cold, hard scientist or a fluffy, impractical philosopher, but they're missing the real insight. The true genius of this collective work is the concept of understanding-based integration. It suggests that the different ways we explain the world, whether through the mechanistic details of a single brain cell or the topological networks of social behavior, are not competitors at all. They're part of what we might call an explanatory nexus, a web of understanding where every thread supports the others. We need to reframe the entire debate through Ludwig Wittgenstein's concept of family resemblances. Science and philosophy aren't distinct species with clear boundaries. They're a family of activities that overlap, borrow from each other, and blur together in messy, deeply human ways. As Daniel Dennett put it, there is no such thing as philosophy-free science. There is only science whose philosophical baggage is taken on board without examination. The implication for you is profound. To be truly scientifically literate, you must also be philosophically competent. If you ignore the philosophy embedded in your science, you're not being objective, you're just being uncritical. This brings us to one final unresolved tension. If science relies on philosophy to define its methods, and philosophy relies on science to constrain its theories, then reliable knowledge itself becomes a moving target, a negotiation rather than a destination. Philosophy is dead, the confident claim once rang out. But as we've seen, philosophy is merely the naturalized epistemology that lives inside every hypothesis you test and every moral choice you make. It's the reason-based logical analysis that gives empirical data its meaning and its purpose.